Welcome to Deep Thoughts, a podcast designed to take you on an introspective journey into the mindsets and strategies that fuel personal growth. In every episode, we'll explore the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and real-world tactics, guiding you through powerful methods to elevate your health, wealth, relationships, and overall well-being. From deep dives into transformative habits and mindsets to candid discussions about the challenges we face in today's fast-paced world, Deep Thoughts is here to remind you of the untapped potential that lies within. If you're ready to disconnect from the distractions and connect with the tools and insights needed to create lasting change, this show is your sanctuary for self-discovery and empowerment. Tune in, reflect, and take action towards a more vibrant and fulfilling life.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be back.
So, it's funny, we all ask this question, right? Like, how are you? I mean, how many times a day?
Oh, countless. I mean, it's just part of our, everyday interaction.
But you sent me this excerpt, Unlocking the Depths of How Are You? The power of being fully present. And it, totally made me rethink that whole, automatic response we all have.
Yeah, we say fine or good without even really thinking about it. Exactly. Are we really fine?
So in this deep dive, I mean, should we try to, unpack that a little bit? What's going on with this simple question?
Yeah, let's explore how this question, as simple as it is, can actually be a gateway to some pretty profound stuff, like self-awareness, deeper conversations, and even, genuine connections. Like we were saying, just kind of breaking free of those automatic responses.
Yeah, those autopilot I'm fines.
Yeah, exactly.
So right off the bat, this excerpt talks about how are you? Has basically become a social script.
Right. It's lost a lot of its original meaning.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was just thinking about this before we started recording. And, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I've definitely caught myself just kind of rattling off fine thanks without even a second thought.
Oh, all the time.
And it's not even I wasn't fine. It was just why even ask if we're not even going to think about the answer?
Right, exactly. We're just going through the motions. And that's where this whole idea of mindfulness comes in, which the excerpt really emphasizes.
Okay, so mindfulness. And I think a lot of people, when they think of mindfulness, they think of meditation and yoga and, things like that.
Right.
But this is talking about bringing that awareness into, everyday conversations.
Exactly. It's about being present in the moment, even in these seemingly insignificant interactions.
So even with how are you? How do we bring mindfulness into that?
Well, the excerpt suggests pausing, actually taking a moment before responding. Creating a space for actual reflection.
Okay, I like that. So instead of just being on autopilot, just oh, fine, thanks.
Yeah.
Take a breath and be how am I actually doing?
Exactly. It's interesting because the excerpt also talks about this idea of recognizing subtext. Is the person asking, how are you, actually interested in your well-being, or is it just, a social nicety?
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes it's they're just saying it because it's what you say, but other times it's no, really, tell me how you are.
Exactly. And that awareness allows you to choose how to respond.
I see, yeah.
And then, the excerpt sort of brings up this kind of, almost like a fear of honesty. Why are we so hesitant to give a truthful answer sometimes, even when we want to?
Yeah, why is it so hard to just say, actually, I'm not doing so great?
Right. And the excerpt suggests it's because we've kind of been conditioned to prioritize convenience over authenticity. It's just easier, to say, I'm good and move on, rather than risk an awkward silence or a conversation that the other person may not be ready for.
Right. And it is awkward, right? It's you're in line at the grocery store, the cashier's how are you? And you're well, actually, and you launch into this whole thing.
Exactly. But that's, kind of the paradox, right? We fear vulnerability, but vulnerability is the key to really connecting, It's actually building genuine relationships.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the excerpt kind of points out that by choosing convenience over honesty, we might actually be hindering the kind of relationships that we want.
Exactly.
So, the big question then becomes what happens when we do break free from these, automatic responses? What happens when we do get honest? And the excerpt paints this really compelling picture of these ripple effects. If we start responding more genuinely, it can transform our interactions.
Absolutely. Imagine, instead of just saying, fine, you respond with, actually, I know I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed today, but I'm managing.
Yeah.
It just opens the door for empathy. for understanding.
And it makes it real. So it's not just this like surface level interaction.
Exactly. And you might actually have, a really helpful conversation. Maybe you even get some support that you didn't know you needed.
Yeah, that's so true. Like just that little shift can make such a difference.
Absolutely. And, the excerpt goes on to connect this whole mindful approach to how are you with these 4 really interesting themes.
Okay, let's hear it.
So we have the mask of politeness, how societal norms can actually stifle authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's emotional literacy, the importance of developing a language for our feelings, time perception, how pausing can actually make us feel more present.
That's interesting.
And then finally, energy awareness. The difference between automated responses kind of draining our energy versus conscious dialogue being revitalizing.
Okay, there's a lot there. So let's break those down a little bit because those are big.
Yeah.
So let's start with the mask of politeness, which I think is really interesting. It's this idea that sometimes, we're so focused on being polite and being appropriate that we actually end up hiding our true feelings.
Exactly. It's like we default to these pleasantries even when we're not feeling particularly pleasant.
Yeah. And I think we all do that, right?
Yeah.
It's like you don't want to bring people down, so you're just like, oh, yeah, everything's great. Then, maybe that's not really how you're feeling.
Right. And so the excerpt kind of argues that this, this idea of politeness has almost become a barrier to authenticity.
I see.
So then moving on to the next theme, emotional literacy. This is really about developing a vocabulary for our emotions. And it's not just about labeling them as good or bad, but really being able to articulate the nuances of our experience.
Okay, so it's like not just I'm happy or I'm sad, but being able to really describe what's going on inside.
Exactly. And the excerpt suggests that by practicing this, by developing our emotional literacy, we actually understand ourselves better.
Yeah.
And then that helps us to communicate more effectively with others.
Oh, that makes so much sense, right? Because if you can't even explain to yourself how you're feeling, how are you going to explain to somebody else?
Precisely.
All right, so what about this time perception thing? Because that one I'm a little curious about. How can pausing, how can taking a moment to think before you answer, how can that make you feel more present?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you would think that being mindful takes more time. But even a brief pause, just a moment of reflection, can actually enhance our awareness and our connection to ourselves and to the other person.
So it's like slowing down to actually speed up.
In a way, yeah. It's about quality over quantity.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then finally, energy awareness. This is about recognizing how our communication impacts our energy levels and the energy of the people around us.
So like if you're just kind of going through the motions saying fine, fine, fine all the time, that could actually be draining your energy.
Exactly. It's like you're not really present, you're not really engaged, so it becomes this kind of autopilot drain.
But then if you're actually taking the time to, be present and be mindful and choose your words carefully, that could actually be energizing.
Right. Because you're consciously creating the interaction. You're not just reacting, you're responding.
I like that. So, okay, so we've gone through all these different themes, and it's like this simple question, how are you, is actually so much more than just a simple question.
Exactly. And that's what the excerpt is really calling for, this shift from autopilot to what it calls a full state of mind.
A full state of mind, huh?
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Well, it's about being present. It's about being engaged in our interactions. It's about recognizing that even this simple, everyday question, how are you, can be an opportunity to connect more deeply with ourselves and with others.
So after going through all of this, it really makes you think, how would you answer how are you differently now? What would it look like to really bring that full state of mind to that interaction? And what kind of ripple effects could that create in your own life? Just something to think about.
Yeah, some really interesting things to ponder. Thanks for diving into this with me.
Absolutely. This was a really fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Deep Thoughts Podcast. I hope you found insights and inspiration to take with you on your journey of self-growth. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated on new releases and exclusive content. See you next time, where we'll continue to help you grow and explore your full potential.